Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Underserved, the podcast for the rest of the tech industry. I'm your host, Andrew Jelina. I am here this week with Vikas Singhvi, a technology leader and former CIO who's worked with tons of engineering teams over the years. Vikas, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here.
So a question I often ask folks right up front is, what got you initially excited? Tell us a bit about your origin story.
Sure. In terms of exposure to technology, I got it pretty late. I would say that when I was in 10th grade, my brother, he was kind of tinkering with some technologies and all that. So I was just kind of, this looks cool. And then one of my brother's friend, he was studying back home in India in IIT, and that's premier technology school. And that really got me excited. And it was around that time, outsourcing story was kind of beginning to take shape, and things were looking pretty exciting as far as the computers were concerned. And at that time, I thought like, hey, maybe I would want to make my career in computer engineering. And that was pretty interesting conversation for me because in my family, everybody is pretty much like accountant. Both my brothers, they are accountant. My cousins are accountant, and pretty much everybody. So I was talking to my brother and he said, hey, why engineering? Why don't you just become an accountant? I can help you and guide you. I said, nope. But my dad was very supportive and he said, hey, whatever you want to do, put in your best efforts and do it. And so I wrote my engineering exams and, got selected. Then I chose to become a computer engineer. And that's how I got started in computer science and computer engineering. And even in that, when I started back home, the infrastructure in terms of the computers and all that, that was not as good as what you would have now. I mean, I started programming on, the DEC wax machines. And so that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, we had the DEC PDP 1170s with like VT100 terminals in my school. We were kind of lucky because Digital was in Massachusetts and they granted a bunch of these systems to schools in the area. And so we were able to code way back then. But I don't know, for us, it was kind of a scarce resource. Like you had to get time to do it. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much like that. And we used to get ration in terms of kind of time on computers. So anytime when we used to do some programming, we have to make sure that we write our program on piece of paper, get it examined by a teacher, make sure would make sure that the logic is right, as well as the syntax is right, and then you go and use computer to write it. So now if I think about IDEs and all those tools that we have, like it looks like such a luxury that we and in exams we have to write all our code absolutely right in the first attempt. Otherwise, your marks will get deducted. So it created a good solid foundation, and it just kind of forced me that you do the things right. Make sure before you start programming, you don't just rush to it, just kind of make sure, think through it, and then kind of start writing your code. So that was pretty good foundation for me.
We did the same thing when we had programming competitions in high school. You had to write out the solution first and get it approved, and then you could go furiously type it.
Yeah.
And it definitely does give you a skill to kind of think things out in your head ahead of time and imagine how things might go. Whereas today, it's so super easy to just paste something you grabbed off Stack Overflow in and start hacking at it and see if you can make it work.
Yeah, exactly. And this was pre-Google and pre-Stack Overflow. So, you had to kind of, if you got stuck at something, you have to kind of figure out on your own or take help from your friends. And now you are stuck at something, you type in something in Google and you know that somebody else might have already gone through that challenge. So it becomes so much easier now. So it's good though. It's pretty good.
Definitely does make us a bit more productive. So tell me a bit, I know we talked a little bit when we initially met about the next round and your experience there and how things changed as the company grew.
It was a great experience. It was a great learning. I would say that it was a transformational experience for me. So the next round was a startup, and it was a small startup when I joined. I believe, was 7th employee. And at that point, we had 2 customers. And the next round used to build software product for private equity and alternative investment domains. So we used to create software for fund administration of private equity and alternative investment industry. At that time, I was on my H-1B visa. And, joining a startup was risky, but I was kind of interested in kind of doing something more challenging and more interesting. And I say, all right, let's see if it works out. Great. If not, it's a good experience. And that's how I see on many things, if wherever I'm not sure what's going to happen. And so I joined that as a principal developer. I was the seventh employee there. And as I said, we had just had two customers, but one of those customers was Bain Capital. And I was like, if Bain is using this software, I'm sure it has some legs. And I was right that way. Within a couple of years, from two customers, we had 40 customers. And at that time, I started managing engineering team. And we saw a tremendous and rapid growth from 40 customers. Within a couple of years, we had around 240 customers managing over $300 billion of assets on the software. And, it was awesome. But it presented its own challenge. Not only you have to constantly improve your product, you constantly move your product forward, but at the same point in time, you have to make sure that you expand your team rapidly, but don't lose your quality. Because, that's a challenge that if you talk to any startup, they will say that biggest problem that they have is not having customer. And the second biggest problem is having a lot of customers. So, but then second problem is always more preferable in my mind. So kind of creating a basic foundation and then kind of scaling that foundation to support large number of customers is really interesting challenge where you would need to learn how to mentor new hires, kind of get them up to speed quickly. And in the startup, you don't have a lot of the leading time. So if somebody come in, you want to make them productive as soon as possible. And we used to pretty much, kind of get, when we used to hire a new developer, most of the times that developer used to make production changes pretty much on the first or second day. So, and then over the period of time, it's just like we used to kind of make them more kind of involved in the more challenging task. And so it was awesome. It was tremendous growth. At that time, 2008 happened. And since we were in the financial services industry, we got impacted badly. And rather than growing rapidly, we shrunk. And we survived somehow 2008 to 2009. But in late 2009, SS&C bought us. We became part of SS&C, and SS&C is a really big financial software and services company. It provides us as a good stability, support, as well as, way to grow further.
Well, that's good. One thing you mentioned that a lot of folks might not know if they grew up here in the States, it's a gamble to go to a startup somewhat, but if you're here on an H-1B visa, you need to be basically continuously employed while you're here.
Absolutely.
And if a startup suddenly went up in smoke one Monday, you could potentially be out of status and basically booted out of the country. So
Yeah.
it's definitely something a lot of people are cognizant of and are looking for somewhere stable to land if they're working here on a visa.
Yeah, no, that was it. I mean, on the hindsight, if I look at it, wow, did I take that risk? And
well, it worked out.
It worked out.
So tell me a bit, as the company grew up in size, what did you learn about change management and maybe putting some process around those folks instead of deploying things to production day two?
So I think we still kept a rapid pace of change when we grew, but we were much more intentional about it. And we kind of created a much better process of reviewing what we're going to make change. And we kind of create more like a pipeline versus ad hoc. Okay, I need something. I would say that earlier, it was more like McDonald's model. When somebody say, I want this change, and we used to make that change and make it available. Now we kind of made it more like your assembly line process in a way that we are still making change on the daily basis, but those were much more thought through. Things were much more intentional. And the other thing that I kind of learned as I became engineering leader in the next round is it's a pretty interesting story. The founder of next round, I always be thankful for giving me this opportunity. And he was a great mentor in a way that when he kind of promoted me to lead the engineering team, he told me, congratulations, Vikas, this is a great thing. But the job that you have right now and things that you do in the current role won't be applicable in the new role. And don't try to keep doing the things that you were doing in your previous job. And other thing that he really wanted me to being very, very decisive. He was like, everybody makes decision every walk of their life on every day. But as you become manager or as you become leader, your impact of your decisions are much more bigger. And impact of not taking any decision and waffling around is even bigger. So you have to be really decisive, make quick decisions. And he was like, if you make 10 decisions and if you are wrong about 3, I can live with it as long as you don't burn the company down in those 3 decisions. And this is very much similar to what Jeff Bezos talked about is, your type A decisions and type B decisions. And you have to make sure that you make quick decisions because, there, if you make quick decisions, you will get another opportunity to correct them if you are wrong, as long as your decisions don't bring down the company completely. And that I took really to my heart, and I tried to be really decisive, anywhere. That helped me tremendously.
So coming from an engineering background, I definitely understand the struggle. Like as a software engineer, you want things to be perfect. You
Absolutely.
want your code to be perfect. You want everything to work perfectly. You want zero bugs. You want everything to work out, preferably through using your brain and some hard work in order to get everything just so that it works. But in the business world, you often can't get everything just so.
Yeah,
And there's a penalty for indecision and not
absolutely.
doing things quickly. And it can be counterintuitive to like, okay, just go out there and you might get banged up, but make some decisions and do some stuff and learn from it and iterate.
Even in engineering, I mean, the whole agile, processes it kind of favors more towards action versus, you still think through, but at the same point in time, it is intention of those processes are you take your actions sooner, faster, get feedback, and then kind of improve upon that. And that's the same thing applies to the decision making, where you are more agile in a way that you think about it, make a decision, see what the feedback of that decision is. And if you need to kind of tinker or improve, do that.
Yeah, it's a process that takes some getting used to, but tends to get you to working solution faster and something that better fits what actually needs to happen in the business world.
Absolutely.
So speaking of the business world, I know you were working with Capgemini prior to that. What did you learn there?
So I started my career at Patni Computers in India, which later on got acquired by Capgemini. It was interesting place to work with, especially in consulting, because in consulting, the pace of change is even faster because you have to learn different technology based on different client needs. So I started my career with C Unix. I was working on Hitachi's supercomputer operating system project. So I worked on that project. Once that project is over, I moved to the next project, but there that project was in C++. So you learn C++. And the thing is, like, people over there are smart in a way that they move you to the adjacent technology most of the times. And so you learn quickly C++ and be productive, start working on it. Soon from there, you move to VC++, Java, JSP. So over the period, I worked there for 6 years, but in the 6 years span, the exposure to different technologies, different projects that I had, that was really good for me to kind of build a really solid foundation. And that really made me a polyglot, and which is kind of not all tech. And sometimes the concepts that you learn in one technology or one tool transferable. It kind of helps in a way that you could think not just around the tool, but you can think what other things are possible and what are the limits of the tools and how you can extend it. So it kind of helped me that way.
So one thing I've noticed in working with technology is that forever there's been a hype machine. Like when I started in my career in 95, it was CASE, computer aided software engineering. And
Sure.
we were going to get rid of those engineers in 2 or 3 years. And
Right.
the BAs would be able to point and click and build apps. And then I remember XML was super big in 2000. And what do you think about kind of the hype machine surrounding software development? And, is it a necessary evil?
I believe it's a necessary evil. I mean, anytime a new technology comes, there is always some hype surround to it. In my mind, it is necessary because if you think about it, technology projects, if you look back, only 30% projects are successful, and rest of the 70% of the projects fail one way or another, or they don't get to do what they were intended to do. So if you don't have hype around technology or tools, then your adoption will be much, much smaller. In that case, 30% of that small base would be really insignificant. Versus if you have hype around something, your adoption base would be much, much bigger. And the 30% success rate will look really much bigger. And that's how kind of technology move forward. For that matter, I'm going to compare that to what Chairman Greenspan of Fed said about the whole economics and the bubble and bust cycle. And he said that the bubble and bust cycle is important because through that bubble and bust cycle, we see growth. If you don't have bubble, your growth will be really, really small. With this bubble and bust cycle, you get much bigger growth, some contraction, then again, much bigger growth. And that can be translated back to the technology scene that if you don't have hype, you won't have that much of adoption and the technology won't move with that greater pace.
All right. So you need the hype to get good technologies to a critical mass, even
Absolutely.
if they're they're bubbles and they burst, at least now they have some sort of self-sustaining mass to them.
Absolutely.
To find my next job, first, I want to hear about dozens of jobs I am overqualified for.
Someday, I will talk to a recruiter who knows the difference between Java and JavaScript. That will be the one.
Would I mind commuting 3 hours each way each day? Of course not.
All I have to do is go through 5 separate interviews, complete a 10-hour coding exercise, and recite the national anthem backwards? I'm in.
Finding your next consulting gig should not be this difficult. Quite frankly, you deserve better. Syrinx is the consulting company founded and run by software consultants. We get you. Find out why our employees are some of the happiest and best paid consultants in the industry at syrinx.com. That's SYRINX.com. Find a better way today. Syrinx Consulting is a proud sponsor of Underserved, the podcast for the rest of the tech industry.
We've noticed, we've been at this consulting gig for an awful long time. 17 years at Syrinx now.
Wow.
And the one thing you get from consulting that's difficult to get from working full-time is you're pretty much guaranteed to work with a bunch of different clients on a bunch of different projects. And you're going to get exposure to different technologies, different ways of doing things. You're going to see some best practices that you can carry from one client to another.
Sure.
You're going to see some worst practices that you can hopefully warn subsequent clients about. It's kind of like dog years. You spent 6 years there, but it's probably like 42 years of getting experience all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you work on so many different domains. You are not just limited to one single domain. So that's like a lot of learning. And especially for someone who's starting the career, I believe consulting is a great place to start your career with.
Back in season 1, we talked with Mark Carberry about cybersecurity a bit, but I know that you're a veteran of doing some cybersecurity assessments. What was the process like, and what did you learn from doing that?
So I got exposed to, cybersecurity like incidentally. So one of the products that I was managing, I'm not going to mention the name of the place, but I would say one of the products that I was managing, one day I got a call from a client that, hey, the website that you kind of provide us, is showing Cialis ads. And that was embarrassing to begin with, but it was scary because website is just a first step in the process. The more important thing is the data that the website serves. If someone were to get the access to that data, that would have been really, really bad. And the data that we were having was sensitive, that it could be a, newspaper material kind of thing if it comes out. So immediately say, hey, shut down everything, unplug everything. And then, but at that time, we realized that although we say we got to do something around security, but we were didn't have a fully fleshed out incident management plan. So I took a lead in creating the incident management plan that, hey, what happens if things are not working out or somebody hacks your system? How quickly you should respond. And when you respond, it's not just one group. Now you have to kind of assemble a team of people. Sometimes you would need to take help from people from outside. And if you are making those decisions in the stressful time, sometimes things might not go as you plan. So you want to have all those things scripted out in advance. And then you need to know who to communicate, how to speak with your customers, how to speak with your PR, how to speak with management. So challenges are not just around technology, but a lot of challenges around dissemination of the information. And at the same point in time, making sure that you make your customers feel comfortable around your plan and they don't think that you don't have any plan and they will be really, really very jittery. So that was pretty interesting, challenge when, they hacked the website that, I was supporting. So from that point onwards, I really got myself immersed in the cybersecurity. Other thing that you see nowadays, a challenge in terms of cybersecurity is with all those agile processes, people are making constant changes to software and systems and applications. But one of the way of kind of measuring your security preparedness or readiness is to kind of do the audits. But most of these audits are point-in-time audits or point-in-period audit, while your changes to your applications and systems are continuous. And so you might pass an audit today, or maybe 3 months back, but then now you're constantly making changes to your applications. So between your two audits, your system might be non-compliant. So we have to think security as a continuous process. We have to kind of include that as a part of our development process, and compliance should also be thought as a continuous process. So there's a continuous compliance and continuous security should be the part of your security posture.
So that reminds me a bit of Agile. So it must be difficult if security is often treated as a point in time, and then you're Agile, and let's say you're doing releases every couple weeks. How do you kind of balance being Agile with being compliant?
So, you have to include security and the compliance as a part of your agile processes. That's why nowadays you see the DevSecOps very popular. The whole DevOps process was your development and operations are getting integrated. Now with the DevSecOps, your security is also part of this process. So your development work, your operational, as well as the security part of the same pipeline. So when you are making any new changes, it goes through the proper security testing, and all that happens through your automated tools. And, at least you should have a process, and better that you have the process and that process is automated. There are a lot of good tools are in market nowadays. So that can help for us to set up that kind of structure.
Are there any tools in particular that you liked using or recall using that you'd recommend?
So one of the tools that we use was Sonar and Sonar Cube. That's really great for your static code analysis or continuous, and then you could integrate it with your code check-ins, or you can integrate it with the build pipeline. Other thing that you have to keep in mind is nowadays most of the softwares are built using open source components. And when you are using the open source component, you have to be cognizant that any security vulnerability that you have to factor in, it's not just your code. You have to factor in the vulnerability in the open source code and component that you have. So the whole software composability analysis tools like SNCC that we use is something that you would want to use, because that make sure that it's not just your code, but even the components that you are using are secure. If you recall, a few days back, there was some problem. There was a security leak at the Capital One. And one of the things, when I was going through the details of that, one of the things that jumped was they found that there was some problem in their S3 bucket configuration. And if you were to have a continuous configuration, security checking, there are a lot of great tools from Cloud Health. And then there's they are like Palo Alto Networks. They have great tools for configuration management. And then you can take it further from continuous configuration management to continuous compliance. So all these things, you want to make sure that part of your development process, and you think it through before jumping onto cloud or before jumping onto any, agile changes. So you want to make sure that you build a culture of security in your processes.
Okay, so it's not just the code you're writing, it's the libraries you're depending on, whether they're closed source or open source, and even configuration of off-the-shelf things, even as simple as an S3 bucket, that you got to take into account in your plan.
Absolutely.
Definitely agree with, if you don't have a plan, if you don't have a plan, you plan to fail.
Yep.
Yeah, you have to have some sort of idea of how are we going to prevent and how are we going to react if there is an incident.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you a question just about the Greenspun Foundation. Can you tell folks that might not be familiar with it what their mission is and what sort of work you were doing there?
So Greenspun Foundation is a Jewish nonprofit organization, very active in the Jewish world as well as in the Western Massachusetts. Their biggest program is called PJ Library, wherein the foundation ships almost 1 million books every month all over the world. And these are the kids' books with the Jewish values. These are not religious books, but nice stories. This is such a tremendous program in a way that it not only teaches kids the Jewish values, but at the same point in time, it also teaches that reading books is important. And that is a way for families to spend time together. And at the same point in time, it is also by supplying so many books, shipping so many books, it also creates the whole new literature, and it supports the authors. So it's a really tremendous program that the Greenspun Foundation supports, and they have created. Beyond that, there are a few other programs called JCamp, which is JCamp 180, wherein Greenspun Foundation provides management as well as technology consulting to Jewish day camps. There's another program called Voice and Vision, where Jewish art is supported by the foundation. And then there's one more program which is called Life and Legacy, where the Greenspun Foundation works with the local Jewish organizations to raise the legacy fund. So Greenspun Foundation is really active in the Jewish world, and especially the PJ Library program is such a great program.
Wow, sending out 1 million books a month. I mean, that's kind of mind-boggling. It's like a mini Amazon.
Yeah.
Is it in English, Hebrew, like all sorts of different languages?
All sort of different languages. I mean, the program is active in Mexico. It will be, the language will be Spanish there. But then program is also active in Canada, US, UK, Australia, Ukraine, Russia, and obviously in Israel. So there are different language books there.
So you've worked with a for-profit company or two, and you've worked with a nonprofit. What were the differences in being a technology leader in each, if any?
I would say at the base, there are many similarities. I would say that at the end of the day, technology, for me, when I was at SSNC, when I was at the next round, technology was around the product. So technology itself was a business. When I moved to SSNC, technology was still, we were still selling product, but we were also providing services based on our product. So we kind of moved more in a support kind of role. And when I moved to Greenspun Foundation, technology was more in support role. So that similarity is there in a way that you want to make sure that technology is kind of most optimally used to solve a business problem. And technology has to be a catalyst. Technology is not the actual business, but technology is a catalyst which is kind of solving a business problem. So that's the similarity that you have. But then on the for-profit side, you have the customers, and customers are a lot more demanding. And versus on the non-profit side, our stake constituents are much more forgiving in a way that if you mess up something, they are a little bit more forgiving that on the for-profit side. That's the thing that I would say, difference I would see between non-profit and the for-profit world.
We talked a bit about came from India to the United States, raising your kids here. What do you do to kind of keep the culture and traditions alive from the home country?
So that's really a challenge, I would say. My kids are growing up here in the US, so obviously I would like them to assimilate with the culture in America. But at the same point, I would want to make sure that they understand their heritage and, they know where their parents came from, what their culture was, what their values are. So that's always a challenge. And both me and my wife are a lot more intentional around it in terms of kind of making sure that kids understand that. And, we would want our kids to really assimilate in US, but how to value the heritage that they got. And every culture has great thing and not so great things. So just pick the best out of both worlds. That would be good. So few things that we do around that is like, obviously have a lot more interaction with my folks in India. And, obviously my kids kind of speak with their grandparents and they talk to them and then kind of spend time. We used to go take a break every year, go to India. Nowadays it's been once in 2 years. But then when we go there, not only we meet with family and friends, but we visit different places in India that, they learn a little bit more about India and Indian culture.
Mm-hmm. So cultural visits, food's definitely a big one where I come from.
Absolutely. Food is definitely a big one. And, I think when I grew up in every part of any festival or function, food is sit right in the middle of it. And so same is here. Like if there's any festival, like Diwali, it's pretty big for us. So we want to make sure that our kids feel really special around it. My wife makes really great Indian food and kids kind of love it. So food is a great way of kind of associating good memories. Mm-hmm. So that's what we try to do.
What are some of the traditional foods that you enjoy or want to keep alive and maybe get your kids to appreciate?
Well, I got a sweet tooth. My wife tells me that, I should stay away from it, but it's so difficult for me. So the halwa, what we call it, carrot pudding, I love it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the challenge for my wife is when she makes it, she spends like 3 hours making it, and me and kids kind of finish up everything in half an hour. And she's like, I spent 3 hours. Come on, guys. At least give it 1 hour. So.
Yeah, better that than letting it sit in the fridge.
Yeah.
I grew up with Ukrainian grandparents, and my Ukrainian grandmother was really big on, most people call them pierogies. Mm-hmm. I think the Ukrainian word is like pitahe. And kielbasa, and then doing the special eggs around Easter. And mm-hmm. that was very big for them to kind of get everyone participating in these cultural things.
Yeah.
For Indian food, though, one of my friends from India, he introduced me to idli with like the spicy chutney.
Yeah.
That stuff was amazing.
Yeah, no, I mean, my kids sometimes they take food to school, the Indian food. So this is one of idli is one of the more popular food among her friends. They can easily like the taste of that food.
Any other lessons that you've learned along the way that you want to share with our underserved listeners?
One thing that I would say that when you are building any organization or for yourself, make sure that you focus on learning. That's one thing that I always kind of focus on, kind of having that habit of continuous learning. And especially in technology, it's super important. The technology changes so fast that, if someone to kind of stop learning for, let's say, a couple of years, and then they come back and see what the landscape looks like, they will feel like a caveman. So technology is changing so much more rapidly, and the changes are the rate of changes have accelerated, over the period of time. So to really, really position yourself in a good way, one has to continuously learn, read books, listen to podcasts. The good thing is there are so many new ways of learning. There are so many, you say open courses like from edX to MIT. So just kind of leverage those resources to kind of continuously learn. And it's useful for an individual. At the same point, it's useful for an organization also because, as you move forward, sometimes organizations would need to apply the transformational changes, and you want to make sure that your staff is ready for those changes.
Yeah, I think one of the characteristics we've seen from great developers, they tend to be hobbyists. They tend to be folks that want to continuously learn, whether it's about software development or some hobby they're passionate about. I remember, and as you said, continuous learning has become easier to do.
Yeah.
I mean, back, when I was starting my career, we would go to, I think there was a bookstore in Burlington where you could get like all the O'Reilly books.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you want to learn a new language, you could sit down and look at that. But online, there wasn't a whole lot for resources, for Q&A, for anything like that. And now, there's a ton of good ones. edX is good. I've been actually using Udemy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Udemy.
Udemy, Coursera.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these are great resources.
The Udemy stuff's relatively cheap. I think most of the courses I've taken are like $20, $30
Mm-hmm.
and have helped me skill up either pure technical things or even video and audio and the stuff that I've been doing here for Underserved. It's definitely helped kind of supercharge things. And then another site is a site called Fiverr, Fiverr.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bunch of folks on there that do all sorts of gigs. You can find folks that do graphic design or, even podcast editing. But I found one of the guys on there that offered to do a class for me and just help fill in the blanks from the things that I had learned on Udemy and YouTube and figuring it out on my own. I said, all right, I want to know more about this audio editor. Like, could we do just a 1-hour WebEx class where you show me how to do this stuff? And that definitely helped fill in all the things from my self-taught learning and helped solidify it. So definitely a underserved, undeserved endorsement for Fiverr as well.
That's interesting. I never used Fiverr as a learning tool, so to speak, but that's interesting.
Yeah, you can propose any gig. So someone might offer certain gigs, but you could say, hey, how about a custom gig to teach me about this? And a lot of the folks are like, yeah, sure. I'll price it up and we could do it. You might have to do it at 11 at night because they're in Thailand, but it can be done.
Yeah, no, that's a great tip.
So speaking of tips, we will be doing show notes to help people get further involved with the topics we covered here on Underserved. And you can find the show notes the same place you can find the podcast. That's at underserved.libsyn.com. That's underserved.libsyn.com. And we're also looking for your feedback. Maybe you've had some of the same experiences or have some tips and tricks for folks, or you're interested in being a guest on Underserved. If so, please send us an email. That email is underserved@syrinx.com. Again, that's underserved@syrinx.com. Thank you, Vikas. We've definitely enjoyed our time here. You've provided some great insight and stories for our listeners. We appreciate you coming down today.
Thank you very much. It was really a pleasure talking to you and sharing my experience. It was really, really awesome.
Well, much appreciated, and we'll talk to everyone soon on the next episode of Underserved.